Well, in our readings today, we're going to meet some very strong images. Elijah on the mountain waiting to meet God, and Peter walking across the water to Jesus. And I thought that it would be appropriate to do a little image editing. More later. Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he dismissed the crowds, he went up into the mountain by himself to pray. And when evening came, he was there alone. But by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far out from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning he came walking towards them on the lake. But when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost!" And they cried out with fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, and he said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And he said, "Come." And so Peter got out of the boat and started walking on the water and came towards Jesus. When he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened and began to sink. And he cried out, "Lord, save me." And Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Images, really powerful things. And we have two really powerful sets of images today. There's Elijah on the mountain waiting for the Lord to pass by. And he expects that God is going to come in majesty and in power, because isn't that what we all expect? You know, that's the image we have of God, that God will be there in majesty and in power. And so when the wind comes and it breaks the rocks and the mountains, Elijah thinks this is the Lord passing by. But he wasn't in the wind. And then the earthquake causes the whole earth to tremble. And Elijah thinks, this is God passing by. But he wasn't in the earthquake. And then the fire, perhaps fires like we've seen sadly on our televisions recently. Really fierce fires burning up the whole landscape. Surely God is in the fire. No, God is not in the fire. And then we've got this absolutely amazing and wonderful phrase, the sound of sheer silence. Isn't that the most wonderful phrase? I don't think it means absolute silence. You know, absolute silence is like when you feel you've got cotton wool in your head. No, this is the opposite of that. This is the sound of sheer silence. When you become hyper-conscious of the bees pollinating the plants and the birds singing in the distance, and perhaps the waves gently coming in and sweeping out again. And even perhaps hear your own heart beating or the sound of your breathing. It's then that in the sound of sheer silence, we can hear the still, small voice. And that's exactly what happens to Elijah. He hears the still, small voice. I've got a favourite hymn. You all know my favourite hymn. It's "Dear Lord and Father of Mankind." And it's the last verse that seems to fit so well to this moment. Breathe through the heats of our desire, the coolness of thy balm. Let sense be dumb. Let flesh retire. Speak through the earthquake, wind and fire. O still small voice of calm. Such a powerful image. And then before we've ever recovered from that, we got Peter in the boat with his friends, with a storm going on. and the waves nearly sweeping over the boat. And Jesus comes across the water. And Peter, focusing on Jesus with all his energy and his love, steps out of the boat and walks towards Jesus. Only he suddenly becomes conscious of the waves and the wind, and its focus is broken, and he starts to sink. But it's not a sad story, because Jesus reaches out and rescues him. Such powerful images. You know, when we had to shut down all our churches in the pandemic lockdown, it felt so unnatural. This is a place where people come and seek comfort. And at a time when people probably had a deeper need for comfort than any other time that I've experienced in the whole of my life, we locked the doors. So what to do? And then comes along this wonderful invention of humankind called Zoom. Hello, Zoom followers. But the big difference was then, I was the only person that they saw in my study. Really boring. Zoom followers, you've got all this wonderful building. You've got the music. You've got the choir. You've got the congregation. All right, it's the back of their heads, but they're still real, I promise you. And that's much nicer because it's got images in it. And then along comes wonderful people who teach me over the internet how to make images that you can put on Zoom. Video editing, really powerful. And it happened in the day, I remember it, because there was a thrush singing in the garden, on a branch in the garden. One of the amazing things that happened during the lockdown was nature took over, didn't it? Wasn't it wonderful? And you know, all the animals sort of came out and said, the world is ours. And the little thrush in the garden was not in the least bit concerned when I went up and videoed it. It just kept singing its little heart out. And before I'd finished, I noticed that there was a cherry tree in full and beautiful, wonderful blossom. So that had to be videoed as well. And then, because the vicarage was right next door to the church, I could take a picture of the church with the sun shining on it. And then I could put it all together. Complete fake, of course, but that didn't matter. There's the church in the background with the sun shining on it, with the sound of muffled bells and the muffled sound of people singing in the church. And superimposed on top of it is a cherry tree in full blossom. And in the cherry tree there is a thrush singing its little heart out. And Zoom stops being boring because an image is really saying, one day, guys, we will be back together. We will be in there singing our songs. We will be worshiping God. Really powerful. So let's do a little bit of image editing with Elijah and Peter. But this is us. This is for us. Because we, I think, very much like Elijah, expect God to come to us in power and in majesty. Or I'll put those the other way around, in majesty and in power. We kind of think that an authentic experience of God will be like Paul on the Damascus Road, or like these amazing people who have been hardened criminals, gang leaders, drug dealers, who find Jesus in jail. And yet, that hasn't happened to me. Mine has never been like that. The majesty and the power. Mine has always been the sound of sheer silence, the still, small voice. But when it happens, you feel the power. You feel as though God has grabbed you, swept you up, and made life different. It's as if you can stand outside the boat and walk on the water. But if your life is anything like mine, I'm not very good at concentrating. And I begin to become overwhelmed by the storms of life and the challenges of life. And it breaks my focus. And I can feel myself sinking. I can feel myself being overwhelmed by the things that are around me. And it feels as though it's my responsibility to put it all right. But I haven't got the power to do it. But it's then that I feel the gentle hand that reaches out and pulls me up out of the sinking feeling and back into the presence of God and the feeling that I am loved and I am whole again and things are as they're meant to be. Of course, God comes in majesty, but God comes also in meekness. Which is why I think that the song that Graham Kendrick sings has so much power. Meekness and majesty. Manhood and deity in perfect harmony. The man who is God. And this is the God that we bow down and worship.